Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton. Thanks for coming in and joining us on a Sunday afternoon. Gerry Hamilton alongside. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Allegiant Digital Marketing. Gerry, news that we're going to go over a little bit today. We got some spring game discussion to talk about. There's an open coaching position still on the Longhorns staff. We want to talk a little bit about the freshmen and what's going on there, as well as a couple other sports and what have you around the 40 acres. A big game, obviously, this afternoon. The Texas women 25-2 taking on 25-1 LSU. But let's start with the spring game news. You and I had talked about this, and it's been a discussion point for almost 2 weeks now. We continue to get more and more confirmation that it's unlikely Texas has a spring game. Instead, actually, and this is what we want to talk about, we're being told it's likely to be a controlled scrimmage, Gerry. And this is obviously could be a multifaceted reason for Steve Sarkisian and his group to do, and his decision to do this, one of which has to do with the spring portal window. You don't want to give everybody and their brother a chance to see what the Longhorns are doing on TV. And at the same time, that is 16-game season, Gerry. So what's your take on all of this and the idea that Texas might go to a controlled scrimmage / OTA version of spring ball?
Yeah, I thought what Matt Rule brought to college football fans' attention is meaningful here. I think as long as there's a spring portal window, you're going to see more coaches move to kind of what we're talking about with Sark, Matt Rule not having a spring game. It makes a lot of sense to me just from that standpoint of not giving everybody a chance to scout your team sitting there on the ESPN and watch them play for 2 hours and watch your first, second, and third string guys play and then recruit those guys into the portal for the spring portal window. I think that makes a lot of sense. If I was in their position, I'd probably do the same. I think we're going to see less spring games in the future as long as there's a spring portal window. So that makes 100% sense. And then what you said about the long season, if you're one of those teams that made it to the college semifinal or final, you essentially had a spring practice already in a weird way. You had those young kids, the Justice Terrys, Lance Jacksons of the world that came in, or Cole Brevard got a few practices, right? They already had, Lance Jackson got in 10 plus practices at Texas. And you got to see those younger kids, those redshirt kids in bowl practices. So in a weird way, if you played that long season, you already had half a spring practice with those kids. I think this is another thing we're going to see moving forward, especially with those teams who advance in the playoffs and play those really long seasons. Then I'm not sure you're going to see those guys play a spring game for that reason. And for the spring, as long as there's a spring portal window, it makes sense to me why they're doing it and why they're looking at it.
Hey, look, Gerry, 16 games. Texas typically plays 13 with a bowl win or bowl loss, right?
Yeah.
But then they go to the SEC championship game. They go 3 games deep into the college football playoff, and you end up with 16 games, a lot of wear and tear on your body. I think, core to this is Sark also knowing what he wants and having that NFL experience with what OTAs can be and what they mean for a team and what he can get out of them versus what he did in the NFL or previously in college. I think that he has to lean on that a little bit to feel pretty safe about what he's doing here too, right?
Yeah, and he gave a hint at that in a press conference late in the year, right? When the whole Diego Pavia thing came up and he kind of voiced some pretty strong opinions against that with that JUCO rule, and then talking about, look, maybe the OTAs, is a way what we're going to be looking at. And if he gave a hint in that press conference, this is not really surprising. But again, I think the combination of the long season, I know everybody's like, well, these are young kids. Yeah, that's true. But again, these are real demands. They have the August camp. They have 2 scrimmages before the season begins. And those are physical scrimmages where guys are fighting for spots. So that's like playing 2 more games in a way for the team itself. So, realistically, you're talking about 18 games is what they played, because those scrimmages, you're playing for spots. And it's a long season. And Sark gave us a hint at this in that press conference late in the season.
Gerry, next piece we need to go to coaching news. Obviously, Tashard Choice leaving the Longhorns to head to Detroit. He gave a farewell tweet yesterday afternoon to the Longhorns. Very good, very appropriate. But what are we hearing right now? I know you have some news in this regard. It doesn't look like Rashad Samples or Keenan Hall, either of those two, are realistic possibilities at this point. I mean, can we say they're completely out of it, or do we think they're just not necessarily going to be the people? And then who is another name that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I was told this morning that they're completely out of it, but I want to caution fans, things can change from a Texas end of things, right? I mean, you just don't know where this is headed. But the impression I got from the person I talked to was didn't think either one of those were going to happen. Again, we want to say things can always change, but it sounds like this morning that's where that's at. I think EJ Barthel's an interesting name. The Nebraska running back coach, and we're not saying he's going to be the hire. I want to be clear. We're just saying he's an interesting name in this whole thing because he has history with Kyle Flood at Rutgers. He was on Kyle Flood's staff at Rutgers as he was working his way up, ended up with the Carolina Panthers for a couple of years, has been the running backs coach with Matt Rule, is similar to Mark Orfe, one of those guys talked about as one of the up-and-coming young coaches in college football. He's 40 years old. He was born in Santa Cruz, California, but grew up in East Rutherford, New Jersey. But again, similar to Mark Orfe, again, he's one of those guys that you hear is kind of on the come. He's rising the ranks in college football recruiting, and he happens to be a running back coach with a connection to one of Steve Sarkisian's right-hand men and Kyle Flood. So there's a lot of familiarity there. So we'll see where that name EJ Barthel goes. But he's definitely a name that we've heard is under serious consideration for the position.
Samples currently the running backs coach at Oregon. Keenan Hall, the running backs coach at Baylor. Not sure if Texas, how overtly interested or if there's any interest there. Steve Sarkisian likes to keep this close to the vest. He's done that in every single hire, just about, Jerry, that he's had. And to your point, he's willing to go off the reservation a little bit for these. He's willing to do a little bit of a due diligence factor. You mentioned Mark Orfe. Well, he wasn't a well-known name. He may have been known within the industry, but not a well-known name. Chris Jackson was not. Kenny Baker was not when Sark made these hires prior. So EJ Bartel is not a well-known name, right? You look at a Rashad Samples who has done good work at other places. He's kind of been in several different places, though. He's been at Arizona State, Oregon, moves like once every 2 or 3 years. Sark may be looking for somebody that wants to stay a little bit longer. What are your thoughts on Sark's MO of hiring assistants outside of maybe coordinator assistants? Like I think him and Kyle Flood and Pete Kwiatkowski and maybe even Johnny Nansen may be a little bit differently situated. And Jeff Banks, who's his special teams guy.
I think one of the big things with the position coaches is, can you relate to the kids? I really think that's a big thing. Tashard Choice's strength was relating to kids and also building a relationship with parents, which I think may be as important as the prospect itself in today's day and age of recruiting. And it's always been there, but maybe even more so now. But look, Chris Jackson, he relates to kids well. He trained guys for the NFL draft before coaching in the NFL. He has dealt with kids, the younger kids, for a while now. He wasn't just an NFL guy dealing with 30-year-olds. Before that, he was training guys for the draft. Kenny Baker, obviously coaching 1 year in the NFL. Before that, he's a younger guy, was in Western Kentucky as he was working his way up. Those guys are all very relatable with young kids and young people. I think that's one of the keys. Mark Orfe, the same. You look, and there's some similarities there. I think there's a little bit of a trend with Sark if you look at those positions. Even Brennan Marion was that way, right? If you look at their age range, all those guys are pretty similar to what Sark's looking for. But I'll tell you the other thing. How popular was the running back opening at Texas? We were told there was guys internally on the staff that wanted to interview and throw their name in the hat, name in the ring for that one as well.
Multiple guys that are in support roles right now. Yes. Yeah. It's totally true. All right. We'll keep going. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I also want to talk about the freshmen. We got a little content on that as well as some other things. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, for today's episode is Allegiant Digital Marketing. Chad Markham and his group at Allegiant Digital Marketing are there to help you and your business grow. If you are looking for someone to help you find new customers, get consistent leads, or just simply find marketing services to promote your business that actually work, make sure you reach out to Allegiant Digital Marketing. That's allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball and get a free marketing plan. Plus, you can save up to $2,500 in advertising with their Hook 'em Horns special today. That's allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball to get a free marketing plan. Plus, you can save up to $2,500 in advertising with their Hook 'em Horns special. Thank you to Allegiant Digital Marketing for their sponsorship. Hey, Jerry, the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and we wanted to talk about freshmen on campus. We talked to some folks behind the scenes, and sounds like they're chirping a little bit. The number one class ranking, they're pretty proud of it, Jerry. Enough so that they're kind of saying, "Hey, we're here to rule the roost. We're gonna be the best." Just normal stuff. But I thought it was pretty funny. You and I were talking about it. It sounds like those guys are a little spry right now. I can't wait to get into real practice setting.
One, I love it. I think it's great, and they should have confidence. An extremely talented group of players. And when we say this, we're not saying they're going to cause locker room issues, anything like that. We're not saying that. It's competitive spirit. So it goes one of two ways. Yeah, some guys bust down the door, or two, a lot of guys go to the dentist because they got their teeth kicked in spring practice. So it goes one of two ways a lot of times. But I love the talent in this class. I've heard Jamie French is doing very well. We've talked about Justice Terry. I've heard Elijah Barnes is doing really well early on. So the Nick Brooks, we've talked about how well he's doing, some of the early returns. So this is a class that has a lot of really talented players. They should be confident. And it's an important class too, because this class has taken on the mantra of we want to be the one to help get Texas over the top. Because that's what happens as you're building these programs. Like, and Kirby Smart went through this at Georgia. Those classes that come in when they see the team almost climb the mountaintop, sometimes those classes are the ones with the most motivation. Then after you climb the mountaintop, Sark would have a different set of circumstances to deal with the kids that maybe have the expectations of it happening. But this number one class, first number one class since 2002, by the way, they are kind of coming at the perfect time because they've seen Texas almost climb the mountaintop but come up a little short. And now they really want to be the ones to help push this thing get over. That's a great spot to be if you're the Texas staff.
Not just get over, but to the top, right?
Yep.
I mean, you mentioned Kirby Smart. He didn't win a national championship till his 7th year in Athens. Well, Steve Sarkisian just finished his 4th in Austin. So if he's going to get to the top, not just over the top, but to the top, this class, the last class, they might be the ones to make that happen. We'll see what that means, et cetera. All right, other news and notes. Texas basketball had a win, really a do or die game, I think, at the NCAA tournament yesterday. They came out on top and beat Kentucky 82-78. But, Jerry, what I thought was important in that game, Trey Johnson with a career high of 32 points, really dominant at the end. They put the ball in his hands and he came through. But I felt like he had a partner in crime yesterday, with Tremont Mark. It felt like they had a true 1-2 punch, and it was I don't know. There was something about it that made sense. And one of the reasons why Texas won, it felt like they had that 1-2 punch, I guess.
Yeah, I think the tough thing with Tremont Mark, because he was doing really well in preseason, hurt his ankle, then hurt it again before the Colorado scrimmage after having a really good scrimmage against TCU. Because he missed time, it became Kaluma in Trey Johnson with Pope as the third guy. And Tremont Mark really, I think, has kind of struggled finding his role on this team. Why he's so important for this team, though, in my estimation, he is a really good playmaker in the ball screen game. Trey Johnson's going to go score. Not that Trey doesn't make good passes, but Trey Johnson's job is to score and put pressure on the defense in a scoring way. Tremont Mark, his What Texas needs from him is to be a playmaker in the ball screen game, as well as then make the most of his scoring opportunities. He had 26 this season high last night, and a number of really good passes in the ball screen game in the half court offense. So that is, if Tremont Mark can find his way a little bit more late, then that really helps this team. The key for me with the win, and now Kentucky was missing two of their top three guards, just like Texas was missing Kaluma. So they were missing some key components in the backcourt in that game. But what this win did, and this is a separate discussion from the Rodney Terry discussion the Texas fans are having right now, is this gives you a path to the NCAA tournament, because it's important to make the NCAA tournament if you're Texas. I mean, the last thing you want to do is miss the tournament. You want to make the tournament.
Especially in your first year in the SEC.
Yeah, and now they have a path to 8 wins. If they had lost this game, I didn't see the path to 8. Now, 7 might get you in a play-in game, but 8 gets you in the tournament, even though you're 8-10. Now you're not forced to go win 2 road games after an off week, and you also don't have that bitter 4-game losing streak taste in your mouth in the off week. So Texas gets a big win. It's a quad 1 win. Most of them are in the SEC, but now they have, after a week off, they go to South Carolina and to Arkansas. They only have to split those road games. That's a different type of pressure. You just need to get 1. Then you have 3 games left after that. And 2 of those are home games, Georgia and Oklahoma, games you're favored in. So now the path to 8 wins is there for Texas. But Texas and Rodney Terry, that's a different discussion. But for this team, what we're talking about here, they now have a path to 8-10. If they'd lost to Kentucky, man, it was looking bleak for me.
All right, that was the men's basketball team. Obviously, the women, we mentioned that earlier. They take on LSU. Texas 25-2, LSU 25-1. This is going to be a big-time battle later today. That starts at 2 o'clock, or tips at 2 o'clock. I also want to mention congratulations to head baseball coach Jim Schlossnagle. His first Longhorn win last night came with a 10-0 win over Ole Miss up in Arlington. They lost Friday night in extra innings to Louisville. They actually play Oklahoma State, former Big 12 foe. They play them at 6:30 tonight in Arlington. We'll see what happens there for the Longhorns. Also want to mention Mike White and the women's softball team went 2-0 yesterday. They are now 10-0 on the season and continue to be ranked number 1. Jerry, before we let folks go, anything else you wanted to add to this episode of On Texas Football? We have the 7 o'clock live stream later tonight.
No, just the Texas football staff will be back in the offices tomorrow after taking about a week, maybe 9 days off, coming off the long season in January recruiting. Sark gave those guys some time off, as other staffs did as well around the country. So those guys come back on Monday, get into spring practice preparation, and then you get back. The dead period in recruiting runs through March 2nd, I believe, maybe March 3rd. Then you'll start to see unofficial visitors around Texas spring practices. But the Texas staff's been enjoying some time off, kind of recharging the batteries. Now they're back at it tomorrow in Austin.
All right, it's going to be good stuff. All right, I want to say thank you again to our sponsor. That is Chad Markham and his group at Allegiant Digital Marketing. Remember, if you're looking for ways to reach new customers or just advertising that works, reach out to allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball. You'll get a special $2,500 offer plus a free marketing plan. That's allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball. Thanks very much, Jerry. You guys have a good Sunday. We'll be back at 7 o'clock tonight. Hook 'em horns.